Looking at Swanage railway station in the summer of 1975, it would have been difficult to imagine that the line could ever become operational again. The disused station, bare track beds and general air of dilapidation gave little indication that anything more than redevelopment, perhaps as a bypass, was on the cards. Today the view is very different, with steam and diesel trains running daily on the award-winning standard gauge line between the seaside resort of Swanage and Norden in the southeast of Dorset. The trip takes passengers past some of the most beautiful countryside in the UK. As the trains travel through the Isle of Purbeck, they go by the magnificent ruins of Corfe Castle along the way. The volunteer-run Swanage Railway has been lovingly restored to evoke the 1950s, a time when southern trains, run by British Railways, carried passengers daily between London and Swanage. The preserved Swanage Railway is now so successful that more than 200,000 passengers are carried between Norden, Park and Ride, Corfe Castle, Harmon's Cross, Hurston Halt and Swanage each year. The railway, operated by the London and South Western Railway Company, originally opened on the 20th of May 1885 as a branch line to transport passengers and freight between Swanage and Wareham. For over 80 years, the railway operated without incident and became the primary method of transportation in the area. But in January 1972, the line officially closed.
The amazing thing is that it took BR just 7 weeks to lift the track, and it took us 30 years to relay it.
The railway's phoenix-like return has only been possible through the sheer determination of the Swanage Railway's army of volunteers. From the beginning, the Swanage Railway branch line proved controversial. Initial plans were drawn up in the 1840s, but objections by landowners and the good burghers of Wareham, who did not want a railway passing through their ancient town walls, delayed construction of the railway by 40 years. The Swanage branch finally opened in May 1885, having taken 2 years to build. In the early 20th century, the railway was largely responsible for transforming the small port of Swanage into a popular tourist resort. The line was also of vital importance to the export of the mellow-hued, locally quarried Purbeck stone, ball clay and marble on freight trains. However, as the motorway became the preferred method of transport, freight trains became obsolete, and in October 1965, they ceased running altogether between Swanage and Corfe Castle. From that moment on, decline for the line would be rapid. Regular steam operations between London and Swanage ceased on the 4th of September 1966. The last steam train to depart on that Sunday evening, a standard class 4260 tender locomotive, was driven by one of the great characters of the Swanage branch line, the late Johnny Walker. The next day, British Rail introduced Hampshire-class diesel-electric multiple units.
The first closure proposal was in the summer of '66, and then there were a series of proposals every year or so.
BR pressed ahead with its devastating plans for change.
They gradually rationalised the line. Eventually it was just one long siding from Wareham down to Swanage.
On Sunday the 18th of June 1967, the very last steam train, a special organised by the Rail Correspondence and Travel Society, ran between Swanage and London. That same month, the Swanage signal box was closed. It seemed that the Wareham to Swanage branch line simply did not fit into British Rail's mainline plans for electrification to Bournemouth.
From British Rail's point of view, I think the issue was that you had a 10-mile branch line from Wareham. In terms of electrification, you could have taken the juice off the main line at Wareham and taken it as far as Corfe, 5 miles. But after 5 miles, you'd need to put in a very expensive substation.
Clearly, electrification was not a viable option for British Rail, but nor was the continued operation of diesel units.
The branch was basically run down. All the tracks except the main line at Swanage were taken up, the turntable was cut up, the sidings, the run-round loops, the box was demolished. It was just one line between Corfe Castle and Swanage, basically worked as a long siding. There was no need for signalling between Corfe and Swanage because in that direction it was just one line.
BR tried to close the line again in 1967, but this time British Rail's proposal was met with high-level opposition.
Local councils objected, even the Transport Users Consultative Committee hearing in May 1968, which was the statutory hearing that government required to take place before a line could be closed, even that said that the line shouldn't be closed because of the inadequacy of the main A351 to Swanage and the inadequacy of bus services.
British Rail remained determined to shut the line, claiming that the Swanage branch line lost £79,000 during 1968 alone.
There was a suspicion that BR was exaggerating the losses to justify closure.
And further local speculation that British Rail was actually inflating the costs of running the branch.
There were stories of the signalling system being replaced at Swanage just a year before it was all ripped out to inflate the costs. There were stories of all the fish plates being replaced about a year before the line was ripped up. There was a lot of controversy about the alleged losses that the Swanage branch made.
Local people formed the Isle of Purbeck Preservation Group in 1969 to fight the closure, but there was little in the way of on-the-ground coordinated campaigning until a determined lady named Moira Cross became involved.
We decided that we would come to Swanage to retire because we loved the countryside, and also there was a good train service between Swanage and London where we still had connections. But the very day we went back to London, having bought a house down here, it was announced that they were going to close the branch line from Wareham into Swanage.
Moira's anger did not diminish.
As soon as we moved down here in May 1969, I stood in the street with a petition trying to get them to stop closing it.
Petitions were set up, and there was a vast number of names of, for local people, because they wanted the railway to remain here. But unfortunately that wasn't successful.
The Swanage line was demoted further when through trains from London ceased in 1969. But still BR could not find a way to close the line. British Rail tried another tactic. The 1971 timetable was scheduled in such a way as to discourage passengers. And further BR closure deadlines came and went.
Local people were angered by it, but there was also quite a lot of people from away who'd holidayed in Swanage who were also very angry. And firstly, they tried to stop BR from shutting the line.
But the death knell finally tolled when BR gave notice that the service between Wareham and Swanage was to close on the 3rd of January 1972. Because there was no winter Sunday service, the last operational day was New Year's Day in the line's 87th year of operation. At 10:15 that evening, Johnny Walker, the man who drove the last steam train, operated the final Hampshire-class DEMU carrying 500 passengers to Wareham Station. Although extremely eager to sell off the branch line, a statutory 6-month period of protection prior to track removal prevented British Rail from lifting the line initially. During that time, the Isle of Purbeck Preservation Group, along with Swanage Urban District Council, attempted to stop the line closure by trying to persuade BR to reopen the line or even sell them the track, stations and land.
Unfortunately, the price that British Railways were asking was prohibitive, and they couldn't muster up enough capital to purchase it at that time.
British Rail demanded £126,500 for the 7 miles of track between Swanage and Fursbrook. Failing to save the line, the Isle of Purbeck Preservation Group fell apart in April 1972. This should have been the end for the Swanage branch line, were it not for the arrival of some outsiders.
Well, there were several people, including 2 university students, who were very keen on seeing it reopened. It was Andrew Goltz from a university, and he was marvellous, and he was so enthralled with railways, he decided to come down and give us a hand. And it was really due to him that he gave us the encouragement to fight it.
Andrew Goltz had holidayed in Swanage with his parents in the mid-1950s and enjoyed travelling on the Southern Region railways of the time. Having read that the branch line could go, he was spurred on to try and save the Swanage Railway.
Andrew Goltz got involved in May 72, which was literally a couple of months before they started track lifting in July 72. He and a university student colleague called John Sloboda got involved.
With his old school friend, Andrew drove down from London one Saturday. Together they walked the branch line to assess whether saving the line was a worthwhile and viable project. They thought that it was. John and Andrew immediately formed the Swanage Railway Society. Their aim was to persuade British Rail not to lift the tracks, and instead to sell both the track bed and land to the Society. On the 13th of June 1972, just 2 weeks before the statutory period ran out, the Society announced their plans to restore a complete service by 1974. Their vision was for a tourist service running steam locomotives between Fursbrook and Swanage, with halts at Blue Pool and Harmon's Cross. They estimated that 800,000 people would be using the line every year by 1975, and thought it would take £150,000 to buy the line and implement the train service. Within a few more years, the Society aimed to provide a diesel service between Swanage and Wareham for local people running throughout the year. The first public meeting was called on the 10th of July 1972 near Euston Station. Mike Stollery, a member of the defunct Isle of Purbeck Preservation Group, remained keen to save the line.
When I went to a meeting in London called by Andrew Goltz, I took along an album of photographs to that meeting, and he immediately thought that I knew a lot about how the railway operated under BR days, and so I was invited onto the committee in the summer of that year, which was a few months after the line had closed, and I've been involved with it ever since.
British Rail planned to proceed with the track removal without delay as soon as the statutory waiting period for the line elapsed. Andrew Goltz persuaded the British Rail Property Board to continue negotiations, and the board asked for an immediate payment of £11,500 based upon a track scrap value of £115,000. The Society agreed to the payment on condition that an independent assessment of the scrap value was obtained. It seemed that talks had secured a delay in the track lifting, but on the 8th day, the very same day as the first public Society meeting, the track lifting began at Corfe without any notice.
7 miles of track lifted in 7 weeks. The scrappage contractors were Eager and Company of Scunthorpe, and I always think that Eager is a rather good name for them because they worked very, very quickly.
A mole within the British Rail Property Board, and unknown to this day, tried to help the Society. Calling themselves 003½, they sent a brown manila envelope to Andrew Goltz containing copies of all the communications and letters between the BR Property Board and the scrap merchants. The documents revealed that the actual price of the track sold to the scrap merchants was only £50,000. Track lifting was clearly intended to scupper any preservation plans. British Rail wanted to pull out quickly and sell off the line for redevelopment, without the hindrance of a preservation group. But society supporters were not thwarted in the slightest by the track removal. Quite the contrary, their campaign gathered momentum. The Swanage Railway Society undertook more vigorous campaigning. Locals and society members wrote letters, sent telegrams, and telephoned British Rail's then chairman. They lobbied the Environment Secretary. They stood outside County Hall in Dorchester and the Town Hall in Swanage protesting. Even Swanage Urban District Council wrote to BR objecting to the track lifting. Despite work commitments preventing him from becoming more directly involved, Malcolm Munro still played his part in the new society.
I had to take a bit of a backward role for many years and supported the railway as best I could, either through political lobbying, letter writing, attending the meetings and the AGMs, and supporting it financially where I could by becoming a Premier Life member.
Although the protestations did not stop the track being lifted, they did secure a face-to-face meeting between Andrew Goltz and the then head of the British Rail Property Board, Robert Lawrence. Having been inundated with angry letters, telegrams and telephone calls, Robert Lawrence pleaded with the young students to turn off the tap. The chairman agreed. In exchange for a notional interest payment of £500, a useful spur for a future track-laying train would be left in place, as well as the ballast, signal posts and the waiting shelter and other structures at Corfe. A second public meeting was held at Swanage Town Hall on the 5th of August. The filmmaker Brian Forbes lent his support. The South Dorset MP joined the campaigning, and Sir John Betjeman became the Society's patron. Unfortunately, Swanage Urban District Council, which had fought against the line closure for 5 years, turned against the Swanage Railway Society. The councillors felt that it was unlikely a group of amateurs could possibly succeed when the local council had failed to stop the closure of the line. The branch line was quickly descending into disrepair. The Swanage engine shed was falling down, the turntable pit was filled with rubble, and the metal water tower had been cut up. The beautiful 1938 station canopy was stripped of its lead and glass, and the other station buildings were boarded up. The large goods shed stood neglected and isolated. The buildings at Corfe suffered too, and all along the line, the trackbed was becoming overgrown.
It all seemed very, very bleak at that moment. The railway station was in a terrible state of repair.
By March 1974, it looked like the Swanage Railway Society had reached the end of the line too.
Swanage Urban District Council bought the area of the station at Swanage as far as the bridge at Northbrook Road.
The council purchased just 4.5 acres of the area around Swanage Station for the princely sum of £150,000. Furthermore, the council let it be known that they would not lease the area to the society either. Indeed, the expectation was for the bulldozers to move in almost straight away to make way for the new amenities. And Dorset County Council purchased the line beyond Northbrook Road Bridge to build a bypass for Corfe using the trackbed. Neither the councils nor BR wanted a preservation group delaying plans further.
All the track was taken up and all the platform was filled in level with rubble. And there was no way that it was going to ever be reopened.
Also, there was no shortage of critics telling them there would never be a Swanage Railway.
And a lot of people at the time, quite rightly, thought these people are nuts. They're complete fruitcakes. They'll never relay the railway.
In spite of all this, the Swanage Railway Society continued its attempts to secure the leases for Swanage Station and the remaining trackbed from Dorset County Council.
We had terrible support from the town council, and everybody was against the railway being reopened as we thought.
Undeterred, the society continued with their campaigning, regardless of their belief about the levels of opposition. Andrew Goltz appealed to the newly formed town council to undertake a town referendum. For a year, his pleas fell on deaf ears. Local hostility seemed to be growing as well.
We had flags hung out, railway go away, and one of our little tiny annual meetings was held under police patrol because, we were threatened with anything that happened if we went to get ahead with the railway.
Finally, their steadfast determination paid off. Dorset County Council agreed to lease the society a quarter of a mile of the trackbed between Northbrook Road Bridge and Victoria Avenue. At the same time, another small glimmer of hope appeared, the chance for a referendum. The campaigners immediately seized their opportunity.
In 1975, when the rest of the country was voting on whether or not to stay in Europe, the residents of Swanage were also voting whether or not to allow the railway to be rebuilt.
We agreed to hold a referendum, and it's not often done in a town, and 85% of the people who voted in favour of a railway.
The town council, which was anti the railway, was forced to give the railway a lease.
Finally, on the 13th of February 1976, the Swanage Railway Society signed a one-year lease with Swanage Town Council with a rent set at £500. The following day, Valentine's Day, Swanage Railway Station belonged, albeit possibly for the short term, to the Swanage Railway Society.
Eventually, they allowed the early volunteers to get into the station, which had been boarded up for many years.
The railway started being rebuilt in 1976 with absolutely nothing. There were buses parked across where the platform was. The platform had been demolished. There were pedalos across near where the goods shed was. The lead canopy at the station had been stripped of its leaden glass, and the platform between the canopy and the embankment was all filled in. The station was completely boarded up. It was a complete restoration job from nothing, which was incredible, absolutely incredible.
The very first pieces of track, previously used as a barrier between the goods shed and the station house, were laid by hand during the long hot summer of 1976. However, the railway's landlord, Swanage Town Council, still prevented track laying. Instead, the first piece of track was laid inside the goods shed. Permission was finally granted the following spring, when the track was laid out of the goods shed's western door, heading for Northbrook Road Bridge.
There's some of the old photographs at Swanage when they started laying track out of the goods shed in 1977. They had to use pickaxes to dig the ground to lay the sleepers in because it was so tough.
A solitary panel was also laid at the coal dock by the derelict engine shed for use as a siding. Volunteers were becoming impatient and were pressing to open the railway to the public. Sadly, the Society's members no longer seemed to share Andrew Golt's long-term vision. So at the 1978 AGM, the Society was wound up and the Swanage and Wareham Railway Group was formed, with the Swanage Railway Company Board charged with shaping the railway's future. Andrew and John took the opportunity to leave. By August 1979, the railway was ready to welcome the public, but initially the trains only ran a couple of hundred yards. These short rides were operated by volunteers using the railway's first locomotive, a 1937 four-wheeled Planet shunter called Beryl, and one carriage. The journey from a temporary scaffolding platform under Northbrook Road Bridge to behind the engine shed cost 10 pence. The volunteers had ambitions, but they needed far more money to fulfil their plans.
We didn't own the track bed, so we couldn't use that as collateral. We leased Swanage Station from the Town Council, the rest of the track bed from Dorset County Council, so we had no assets to get in loans. It was just a very slow period of fundraising, and the tracks were literally relayed sleeper by sleeper, rail by rail.
Initially, it was very much a pioneer spirit. People wanted to rebuild the railway line, and there was no shortage of people who wanted to do that. So it was hands-on, they had something to achieve, and they had an aim, a target to aim for. There were a vast number of people got involved in those early days.
I think people are fired by enthusiasm, they're fired by commitment, they're fired by vision. I think they're also fired by a strong desire to right the wrong of 1972.
Somewhat ironically, components from BR times returned to the preserved railway. The former Swanage branch wooden sleepers, purchased at the time of closure by a dealer in nearby Wareham, were bought by the Society and relaid at Swanage. By Easter 1980, the main platform at Swanage was ready for use. The station had been restored to how it looked in the latter period of Southern Railway's days. The new season saw the line's first steam locomotive brought into service, a small industrial saddle tank named Richard Trevithick. Andrew P.M. Wright first visited the railway that year as a 15-year-old. On a camping trip with friends to Corfe, they decided to visit Swanage Railway one day.
I sort of rather grudgingly went along, and I can remember that we walked on to the station here, and of course in 1980 you couldn't see this. There was trees and undergrowth across the platforms, the track.
The intention was to walk along the track bed from Corfe to Swanage, but after a mile of battling through thick undergrowth, Andrew left his friends to find a bus into Swanage.
My first ride was behind Richard Trevithick, which was the Swanage Railway's first locomotive, a little industrial 040 oil-burning steam locomotive from a power station near Bedford. And I think the ticket was 30p, and I've still got the ticket. And by the end of that short trip, from the station up to just past the engine shed, I'd got the bug.
Swanage Railway's long-serving press officer and official photographer was hooked.
I was fascinated. I'd never actually seen a steam locomotive before, and it was towing a bullied carriage, 4365, which was built in about 1947. And you went inside and it had the moquette of the upholstery and the wooden panelling and the chrome luggage rails and the little prints of sort of country scenes, and I thought, oh, this is what used to run through Corfe Castle till 1967.
The steam train ran between Swanage Station and the engine shed for 3 seasons, whilst the Permanent Way gang worked tirelessly to relay track further up the line.
first mile of track was laid with a hand crane, so you had to wind the crane by hand when you were lifting something up. Each bit of track was laid sleeper by sleeper, rail by rail. There wasn't a lot of mechanisation. It was just very, very hard work.
Laying the track was gruelling work, which required a group of 24 men to manhandle the sleepers, chairs and rails into position, with just a hand-operated crane. Fortunately, following protestations by the Permanent Way gang, the railway's first powered crane was acquired as the track approached Hurstone Halt. With limited funds, almost every item required to rebuild the line was second-hand. Volunteers begged and borrowed track and bits and pieces from all over the country when other railway lines closed. Whenever British Rail closed sidings down, Swanage Railway volunteers were there to salvage the track and other materials. With permission, of course.
I started off as a volunteer in the Signal and Telegraph Department and worked actually excavating from various areas of BR some of the signalling equipment that you see today.
Due to the lack of money, the recovery process was not always easy.
Well, we had to disassemble the rodding, take it all out. We had to dig up every stool using crowbars, shovels. It literally was like a prison chain gang. But we had such enthusiasm that that was the price we had to pay to get the stuff back to Swanage.
The Permanent Way gang reached the 1 mile point at Hurstone in 1983. By Easter the following year, a full 9 years after the Swanage Railway Society first occupied the Swanage site, the little halt was ready for visitors.
The excitement of when we operated our first train to Hurstone. Little tank engine locomotive, 3 coaches. It ran a mile. That was out of the station, past the engine shed, out of sight, along King George's playing field, under Victoria Avenue road bridge, another bend, past the Purbecks. The Purbecks started to come into view. You were at the start of the countryside, and then you went to a little halt just built out of bits of basically scrap wood. And yet that opening, that first train, it felt as though we were running trains to Waterloo, and it was terribly exciting.
Trains were running up to Hurstone for several years before there was a march forward.
People paid 40 or 60p for their trip, went out to Hurstone and then came back again. But it was just the fact that we were running over a longer distance, we were closer to our objective.
The original decaying 2-coach timber platform at Hurstone was extended and widened in 2009. Over 200 volunteers spent a year working on the installation of a concrete structure reclaimed from the site of one of the Croydon tram-link routes. As well as serving local campsites, Hurstone Halt became a request stop following the opening of the line to Corfe Castle and Norden. The arrival of the Permanent Way gang's current 15-ton Stoddard and Pitt crane really speeded up the track laying. Built for the Southern Railway in 1947 and nicknamed FBC, meaning Flippin' Big Crane, FBC laid the remaining 5.5 miles of track from Hurstone. Barry Light joined Swanage Railway in 1987 when the new line had almost reached Harmon's Cross. Believing that the railway needed to be built first, Barry joined the Permanent Way gang.
Basically, track laying, 24 sleepers, 2 rails, 48 chairs and 3 bolts per chair. So we make up the track panels by laying out the sleepers, putting the chairs in, rails in, screw them down, clip them, and then lay the 60-foot panel with the 15-ton electric crane.
A physically demanding and time-consuming task, the Permanent Way gang had to manoeuvre 60-foot-long bullhead rails weighing almost a ton each into position on heavy concrete sleepers. But a dark cloud still threatened the development of the railway.
One of our biggest obstacles was they wanted to build a bypass at Corfe Castle because all the traffic going through was ruining all the buildings, and there was a plan to build a bypass either on the east or the west.
Finally, in 1986, Dorset County Council decided that Corfe Castle Station should once again be used as a station and not demolished for a bypass. Trains had started running to the 1.5-mile point near New Barn by July 1987, and the following year the line reached the current halfway point at Harmon's Cross.
3 miles up the bank to Harmon's Cross, where we started to build the first wholly new station in Dorset for over half a century. Very big, very big.
There was nothing at Harmon's Cross except for a track bed passing through a pretty area of the Purbecks. There were no platforms, no buildings, no sidings and no signal box. Initially, only a single line track with a platform was built, as the railway needed to prioritise use of their funds and resources. Reaching Harmon's Cross was significant in other ways too.
We were using small industrial steam locomotives, but once we'd opened past New Barn and up to Harmon's Cross, you had that 2-mile gradient from Hurston up to Harmon's Cross, which little industrial locomotives couldn't actually handle with several coaches on, so we had to then start using small XBR locomotives.
The first public trains to Harmon's Cross ran in March 1989, with hired-in XBR steam locos hauling the trains in the beginning. The signal box and passing loop opened 8 years later, once the line to Norden was completed. Harmon's Cross, presently the main crossing point for trains, is today a favourite with travellers and volunteers alike. Set amongst authentic-looking buildings in a tranquil spot with lovingly tended gardens, it's difficult to comprehend that until 1996, Harmon's Cross station did not exist. The gardens, the signal box, platforms and waiting rooms look so much an established part of the line. The track bed clearance and track laying work pressed on towards Corfe Castle, but the railway faced a crisis. 3 bridges needed to be replaced and the estimate rebuild cost was almost £500,000. All the bridges were in a very sorry state. The volunteers needed to replace rotten timbers and drive new piles deep into the ground to carry the weight of the trains. Thanks to the help of a former BR bridge engineer, the railway was able to drastically reduce costs through special bridge designs. Fortunately, only £60,000 was needed for the work. In the summer of 1990, 18 years to the day after the tracks were lifted just outside Corfe Castle Station, the rails were relaid in the same location by Swanage Railway volunteers. The station buildings at Corfe were restored to the style of the 1950s Southern Railway and 1960s BR Southern Region periods. The goods shed became home to Swanage Railway's museum. But the railway had to cope with a potentially major catastrophe. The Swanage Railway faced a financial crisis that threatened its very existence. All work stopped and everything that had already been achieved by volunteers hung in the balance.
We had overstretched ourselves and we'd borrowed all this money from the bank. We had to build even more track from Corfe Castle to Norden because the local authorities would not allow us to terminate the line at Corfe Castle because there's nowhere to park. So we had to extend it the extra half mile up to Norden.
The railway owed almost £500,000. Accountants told the directors they would never trade out of it. Bankruptcy seemed inevitable. As ever, the Swanage Railway volunteers' indomitable spirit could not be broken. Instead, they started to find ways to eliminate the debt.
because we'd overspent, we set up this thing called the millstone appeal. Millstone around your neck, and we had little envelopes on every table in every train saying, please donate to the Millstone Fund. Well, eventually we managed to make that deficit correct again and managed to pay back the bank.
All the full-time staff bar one were laid off. It was imperative that the railway reach Norden so that Corfe and Norden could be open to the public. Although the railway had no money, fortunately they had enough materials for the task. 2 of the paid workers had been part of the Permanent Way gang. They stayed on as volunteers to ensure the railway reached its essential target of Norden. By 1992, the volunteers reached Norden, but the park and ride facility had yet to be built. And the platform at Norden Station was to be built out of a kit of concrete parts, but without instructions or drawings, causing a few headaches for the construction gang.
That was really the glorious 12th. It was also amazing. A train leaving Corfe with Corfe Castle behind, running through the cutting, over the viaduct. It was the stuff that dreams were made of. It may sound a cliche, but it wasn't. That's what everybody had been working for and dreaming about and thinking about, and it was just absolutely wonderful. It was a bit like, remaking history. It was only when we operated to Corfe and Norden in 1995 that we started to use what we might call the big engines, the standard tanks and the bullies.
Such was the success of the park and ride scheme that the size of Norden Station's car park was quickly increased to provide more parking spaces, with an additional overflow car park created near Harmons Cross Station. The Swanage Railway has an important function in the local community. Each year, more than 40,000 cars use the park and ride facility, saving 480,000 miles on the narrow and winding road between Corfe Castle and Swanage. The summer of 1999 saw the start of the final track-laying push from Norden to the boundary with the National Railway System, 6.5 miles from Swanage Station.
One of the most memorable days was when we reached Norden, and there's a level crossing, what we call the BP crossing, which crosses our railway line down to the BP Witch Farm oil gathering station.
Laying the track over the BP level crossing required special procedures, as the road had to be kept clear for emergency access. The crane and relaying train could not block the road, but 5 60-foot panels still had to be laid.
It was a rather interesting evening, but no hold-ups, and we done it.
Track laying continued up through Woodpecker Cutting and Eldon Sidings. On the 3rd of January 2002, exactly 30 years after British Rail closed the line, Swanage Railway's tracks reached the Network Rail stop block at Murtala.
I was part of a gang that connected to Network Rail. It was a very special day. For 30 years that the volunteers down here have been pushing towards that goal, and I was fortunate enough to be put in charge of laying the last few feet of rails up to the stop blocks.
Amidst much celebration, 100 railway volunteers and members were invited onto the track to witness a symbolic golden chair screw being sunk into the final sleeper. At last, part of the original vision of the founders of Swanage Railway was fulfilled: connection to the main line. In September 2002, albeit briefly, a weekend link was made between the Swanage branch line and the main line. With the support of Virgin Trains and Network Rail, this temporary connection enabled a new Virgin Voyager diesel train to run from Wareham down to Swanage.
Richard Branson wanted it named on Swanage Station, and it was called the Dorset Voyager, and that was the first through train really for nearly 30 years, and I named it when it came into the station, so that was a great honour.
The train now standing at platform 2 is the 2:30 service to Norton, calling at Harlan's Cross and Corfe Castle. The train now standing at platform 2 is ready to depart. Please close all doors and stand well clear of platform edge.
The success of the line brought the need to reopen the signal boxes. Since the original Swanage signal box had been demolished, the volunteers built a new box which opened in March 2003. The signalling system in use at Swanage has changed little since it was developed by the Victorians. Even the token exchange continues in use to this day. The signalman exchanges a small leather pouch containing a token or key with the engine driver upon passing the signal box in either direction. Corfe's signal box was reopened in February 2005, with trains passing at the station for the first time since the last BR trains in 1972. The current box is rather cramped, so one of the projects presently underway is the building of a new signal box on the down platform. The permanent connection to the main line was approved in the summer of 2006 when the stop block was finally removed, although it took almost another year before the permanent connection was used for the first time.
The very emotional moments where, when we bought in our first diesel locomotives for a diesel gala, off Network Rail, using our link with Network Rail at Matala in 2007. That was very special. It was pouring with rain, but it was still special.
On Thursday, the 10th of May 2007, 4 mainline diesel locomotives and a Southern Region 4 VEP push-pull electric unit travelled by rail to the Swanage Railway's Diesel Gala and Beer Festival. 3 months later, the first steam train in 40 years ran between Wareham and Swanage. It took until the spring of 2009 for the arrival of what volunteers consider the biggest milestone in the preserved line's history: the first passenger train from London to Swanage since New Year's Day 1972.
On the 1st of April and the 2nd of April we had 2 diesel charters from London that came in.
Hauled by a DB Schenker Class 66 diesel locomotive with 12 carriages, the Purbeck Pioneer left London's Victoria Station at 8:45 a.m, arriving in Swanage at 1:50 p.m.
You really had to pinch yourself to believe that it was happening. This was the first passenger train from London to Swanage since the 1st of January 1972, that last day of branch operation, I was absolutely, it was as though you'd won the lottery.
Well, it was 37 years since the last passenger train ran through, so it was a very, very special occasion.
I did shed a tear, I have to say. It was amazingly emotional, and that was shared by an awful lot of people.
They were absolutely sold out. The atmosphere was absolutely electric. The whole station area was absolutely jammed solid with onlookers.
Then, on the 2nd of May 2009, the railway welcomed the first steam train special from London to Swanage.
And that was equally amazing, absolutely amazing. I mean, the weather on the Saturday was beautiful, sunshine, blue skies.
The 12-coach Dorset Coast Express stopped briefly in Wareham for the Swanage Railway and Network Rail officials to board before continuing on to the Swanage branch line. Hauled by the Battle of Britain class 1940s locomotive Tangmere, the Dorset Coast Express became the first steam passenger train from London to travel the line since the 18th of June 1967. That afternoon, Manston and Tangmere pulled the last service passenger train to Norden.
Watching the bullies pass at Corfe with Manston waiting on the up and Tangmere coming on the down past the castle having left London was just an amazing moment. Just, you know, the best natural high you can have.
And for the steam charters, every bridge, every platform, all the way back to Bournemouth and beyond was packed with people. And it really was an extremely emotional occasion. I stood on the platform waiting for the trains to come in, and I'm a fairly solid sort of man, but I did have a lump in my throat, I must admit, because it was so emotional.
I think it's good for the railway, it's good for Purbeck, and it's good for Swanage. And we just enjoy seeing people coming down from London for the day and enjoying themselves.
That afternoon, Manston and Tangmere pulled the last service passenger train to Norden.
Can we all give them 3 cheers for steam and the link back to the main line, Swanage Link? Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray!
It's just amazing what's been achieved in terms of overcoming the financial problems, the political problems, the logistical problems.
Operating one of the most intensive public train services of any independent heritage line, each year more than 200,000 people travel on the 2,800 plus trains. The Swanage Railway covers more than 31,000 miles during 254 days of annual service.
The Swanage Railway still has a huge lot to achieve.
The junction at Wargret, which is a mile west of Wareham, has to be brought up to full passenger regulation signalling.
Since we've had these charters in, we've proven very much to the outside world that we can run passenger trains between Wareham and Swanage, albeit without proper signalling. What we need now is the proper signalling. We're hoping to have a meeting at the Department of Transport with Lord Adonis to see if we can establish a form of funding for the re-signalling, which is going to be, I think, possibly in excess of £3 million.
In the meantime, we hope to be able to achieve these occasional through excursions, perhaps half a dozen times a year. But special arrangements have to be put in place, safety and signalling arrangements with personnel from Network Rail to achieve those, which is possible for half a dozen times a year, but not half a dozen times a day.
Everybody contributes towards the railway, towards the travelling experience for the public. It's a great feeling of family, a great feeling of community. It's just a great project, and I feel very lucky to be involved.
All the volunteers feel the same way about Swanage Railway.
As soon as I was offered a chance to train as a signal on the Swanage Railway, that was me hooked again. So it just led on from there. So here I am as chairman.
Following his long involvement as a Swanage Railway member and supporter, Malcolm finally had the opportunity to become an operational volunteer in 1991.
Coming down here is very much a pleasure and a hobby, but I enjoy doing something that facilitates the movement of people to and from their holidays and their days out on our line, which I think is one of the biggest buzzes one can get.
Swanage Railway volunteers worked tirelessly to find new recruits.
It was Andrew Wright that got me involved with it. He came and done a talk to us at our local railway group at Gillingham, and I came down, he showed me around, and I got the bug. I get a lot of satisfaction of seeing something that I've done. Track laying it was good fun. Also, I'm a volunteer fireman down here. I've laid the track and now basically I play with it.
Even though the railway has 500 devoted volunteers providing services worth more than £2 million a year to the line, more recently it's become difficult for the railway to find enough new recruits.
I mean, the rails are permanently shiny and silver because of trains between sort of 9:30 and midnight every 35 or 40 minutes. So it's that conundrum of actually developing it and extending the railway whilst also running the railway, which takes a huge toll on the volunteers, the small core of paid staff that supports the volunteers.
As we progressed building the line, rebuilding the line, we've always had a pretty good influx of volunteers. But now we've joined it all up, it's much more difficult to get people because it's now maintenance.
We can utilise everybody. Everybody has skills that we can use, and it's very, very rewarding work.
The great benefit for me has been the friendship and all the company I've had. It has made my life down here. I've met so many wonderful people, and I've done quite a lot of various things on the railway.
Even though the railway has £1 million annual turnover from ticket sales, fundraising is key to the survival of the Swanage Railway.
When we want money for capital investment for new buildings or something like that, we have to go out fundraising.
Without the freehold for the land, Swanage Railway also has difficulties raising capital through lottery funding and other grants.
Things still to achieve are to continually develop the Swanage Railway. We've got the box at Corfe Castle being developed, and that will include the capability to actually talk to the signalling centre at Bournemouth, which is very exciting. Other aims are to actually bring on Blue Pool, perhaps with a halt.
Blue Pool is a popular tourist attraction near Fursbrook. One thing is certain though, Swanage volunteers will find a way to raise the funds necessary for the re-signalling work. And the volunteers will succeed in operating an all-year-round public amenity train service between Wareham and Swanage.
Human nature is such that everybody wants to back a success when they know it's going to be a success. It's different on a wet February day in 1976 when you're there with your spade and your pickaxe trying to dig up the ballast that's like concrete to lay tracks sleeper by sleeper. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. It does show the power of the human spirit.
It's sort of being in at the beginning of something, and when literally the station here was desolate and the line was all ripped up, to now when you see it fully functioning again as a railway, carrying something of the order of 200,000 passengers each year, happy families up and down, it's just a wonderful feeling to have seen it from actually its nadir to now a time of when it's, you know, it's a fully functioning entity again, very much as it was way back in the 1950s. It's sort of latter day heyday, I suppose you could call it.
Moira Cross, against all odds, battled to right a wrong when the line closure was first announced in 1969. Moira, along with the other wonderful and dedicated volunteers, succeeded in rebuilding the Swanage branch line. Not only that, but they achieved the impossible when they saw the first trains from London return to Swanage in 2009. In doing so, they helped protect a charming town, boost the local economy, and win over the local people.
It has brought a lot of business and a lot of visitors to Swanage, and I think it's been a very, very, very good thing. The town does support us now, and you know, so we're very pleased about that. And it's getting very well known now, Swanage Railway.
The railway's long-term plans to permanently restore the mainline connection with a local service to Wareham may seem an impossibility, but for the past, present and future volunteers at the Swanage Railway, we should never forget that absolutely anything is possible.